The compact fluorescent lamp is essentially no more. We've moved on. In our search for more efficient sources of lighting, we've gone full steam ahead towards the glowing computer chips we call LEDs. I'm borrowing glowing computer chips, by the way, from a vehemently anti-LED commenter who thought that was some sort of a derogatory quip, but honestly, I think it's awesome. Glowing computer chips, yes please. Now, I'm not about to go and make a video about the slightly antique light bulb that's better than yours, because today we are in an objectively better place. I wouldn't for a moment suggest that the CFL was a superior light source to, honestly, any LED bulb you can find today. Well, okay, perhaps better than the very dubiously made LED bulbs that folks like Big Clive find on eBay, at least from shock hazards and prone to burning your house down perspectives. But while these were flawed, problematic, and aesthetically suboptimal, in hindsight, I think they got an unfairly bad rap. And in this video, I'd like to explain why. Let's begin with why these were a big deal technologically. The reason fluorescent lighting was a thing in the first place is that the technology produces much more light per unit of electrical energy than is possible with incandescent bulbs. Fluorescent tubes also had a much longer life than the typical incandescent lamp. The efficiency and long life made fluorescent lights more economical, so in applications like office buildings, store locations, and other places where a lot of light was needed for a long period of time, fluorescent lighting made perfect sense. But for many years, the form factor was rather commercial. Long fluorescent tubes, like these, were the de facto standard for many decades. Sometimes we'd get a little clever and bend them into a U-shape or maybe even a circle, but that was it. Now, these tubes are filled with a low-pressure mixture of various gases and a tiny bit of mercury. When an arc discharge is produced along their length, the mercury vapor emits a lot of ultraviolet light. A mixture of phosphors that coat the inside surface of the glass then convert this largely invisible UV discharge into visible light that we can see, making the mercury discharge useful for our eyes. Additionally, the glass itself blocks nearly all of the harmful UV wavelengths. It takes special quartz glass to produce UVC germicidal lamps. Nevertheless, many people wrongly assumed that ordinary fluorescent lighting produced harmful UV. It didn't, at least not in any remotely meaningful amounts. This is a bit of a tangent, but the clearest evidence of this is that the plastic lenses used in fluorescent lighting fixtures generally didn't yellow with time, which you'd expect them to, and rather quickly if the tubes were producing ultraviolet light. UV is not kind to plastics. Anyway, you also need a ballast and starter circuit to drive these tubes. First, an arc discharge has to be established. After all, this is a long tube, and getting electricity through plasma from this end to that end takes a bit of effort. There are many different ways to do this, which aren't important right now, but once it's struck, you have a new problem. Being a discharge lamp, you need a current limiting device or else it will explode. Okay, well maybe not explode, but discharge lamps have negative electrical resistance, and without a current limiting ballast, they would rapidly enter a sort of runaway condition and cause problems. So, with any given fluorescent fixture, you'll have a ballast and starter of some sort driving some number of large tubes. As a result, fluorescent fixtures tended to be large. This is a basic shop light, and as you can see, it's long, 4 feet to be precise. Shorter tubes were available, and eventually you also had fun things like the Circline tubes, but in general, fluorescent lighting was limited to overhead applications where space wasn't at a premium. So, shop lights, troffer lights, surface-mounted light strips, etc. Applications that, for the most part, weren't found in the home, and if they were, it wasn't usually in a formal space. But wouldn't it be great if we could have the benefits of fluorescent light, that being longer life and lower energy use, in more places? Heck yes it would. But how to do that? Well, you could build this thing, which I made a video on quite a while ago, but that's definitely not the most practical way to go about it. What we really needed was some sort of self-contained fluorescent lamp with an integrated ballast that is about the same size as an incandescent bulb and with hopefully the same brightness. And so, these things were born. This now iconic curlicue design was the final landing spot after a bunch of different experiments. See, the ultimate limitation to how much light you can get out of a fluorescent tube is its surface area. With these long fellas, that isn't much of an issue. But if you want to get the same amount of light as an incandescent bulb in the same amount of space using a fluorescent tube, it takes some twisted thinking. This 60-watt equivalent lamp has a tube which begins here, travels in a helix to the top, then doubles back down the other side where it ends here. That allows it to occupy a volume smaller than a cube 2 inches or 5 centimeters on each side, while the tube itself is roughly 14 inches or 35 centimeters in length. This alone is a huge achievement in manufacturing and design. This is glass, mind you. We needed a way to mass-produce hollow glass tubes formed into this intricate shape, and we did it. But that wasn't the only innovation here. The tube is driven at a higher intensity than an ordinary tube like this one. That allows its phosphors to glow much more brightly. There seems to be an inverse relationship between the diameter of the glass and how intense the discharge is. You see this as we moved from the old T12 tubes down to T8 tubes and eventually T5 tubes. I'm not exactly sure why that is. Hopefully one of you will let us know down below. But there's also one more trick up its sleeve. It's electronic ballast. Fluorescent lamps operate on the same AC power that everything else does. Because the voltage crosses the 0 point 100 or 120 times per second, lamps run on traditional magnetic ballasts are actually pulsing at that frequency. This periodic dark time limits their output, but electronic ballasts get around this by first converting the incoming AC power to DC and then driving the actual tube at very high frequency AC. That frequency is so high that the phosphors don't have time to decay between pulses, and the effect is the lamp is constantly lit and does not pulse. This not only boosts its output further, but also eliminated the potential for eye strain issues that old-style fluorescent lights could cause in some individuals. I actually made a video about that quite a while ago now. So, these were pretty neat little things. I keep using the past tense, but you can still buy them. They're just very much out of fashion at this point. But they were a big deal. Bringing the advantages of fluorescent light to more places was, I would argue, a great thing. However, they weren't received with unanimous praise, and deservedly so. We'll discuss that shortly. At the same time, though, a lot of the hatred for these things just didn't make sense, at least not holistically. The biggest problem with these things? They're nuanced. And we know how easily the general public engages with nuance. See, I have a pet theory that a large percentage of the aversion to CFLs came from people who really just didn't know that much about lighting in general. I would argue that the CFL was really the first mainstream way to get non-incandescent color temperatures in the home. Sure, fluorescent tubes weren't unheard of in the domestic environment. They found their place in garages and shop spaces. Sometimes kitchens had them, and linear over-the-mirror sort of deals in bathrooms were kind of common. But prior to the CFL, those sorts of odd applications defined what fluorescent light was. Fluorescent light was that cooler gray-blue light you saw at the office or in the store or maybe the basement. And see, here's where my theory comes in. If that was how you imagined fluorescent light, maybe you weren't even aware of the CFLs like this that mimicked the light from an incandescent bulb fairly well. Yes, I know there is and can even see the difference, but I would put money on there being lots of folks out there who wouldn't know this was a fluorescent light source unless they could see the bulb itself. Their imagination is that this is fluorescent. And when the very idea of color temperature is a new concept to a lot of people, I'd bet there was a lot of confusion that led to undeserved and sometimes misplaced hatred of these little fellas, no matter how hard store displays worked to show how warm the light actually could be. Again, this isn't meant to be a love letter to the CFL. They were bad in a fair number of ways, but even I, a really picky person when it comes to quality of light and color temperature, don't have a problem with most CFLs. Some were better than others, yeah, but at their peak, a nice 2700K CFL in a table lamp like this? No problem. About the worst thing I ever notice is a slightly pink, occasionally green cast to the light, but it's really only noticeable when you have another light to compare it to. If an entire room is lit with the same CFLs, my eyes would acclimate to it and I just couldn't see that color cast anymore. Of course, color rendering index isn't fantastic. It's really expensive to develop near-perfect phosphor formulations, so nearly all lamps were good but not great. But I don't think I've ever run across a warm white CFL that messed with colors to the point that I could notice without being hypercritical. I still have some CFLs kicking around without any intention to replace them until they fail. In many applications, their limitations just don't matter, so I'm not about to bother upgrading them needlessly. But, and this was in my opinion their Achilles heel, the suitableness of CFLs was very situational. They wanted to be and were sold as general-purpose light bulbs, but couldn't actually be used as such. Some fixtures were absolutely unfit for CFLs, despite the fact that CFLs could fit inside them. Similarly, some uses for them were impractical, and others would shorten their life considerably, leading many folks to believe that they didn't last as long as the incandescent lights they were supposed to outlive tenfold. And yeah, often they didn't. But in most cases, it wasn't really their fault. Let's start with those untimely deaths. Here's a fixture that seems perfectly appropriate for CFLs. Plenty of clearance for the lamps, not a problem. Except, yes, a problem. This fixture is enclosed. CFLs didn't get anywhere near as hot as the incandescent bulbs they replaced, but they still got hot. Trap one of them, or worse, multiple, inside a glass bowl with no airflow at all, and you've made a torture chamber for them. The electronic components in their integrated ballasts are only rated to a certain temperature, which can easily be exceeded in fixtures like these. And so, premature lamp failure was almost a given in enclosed fixtures. And to be fair, the packaging for these usually warned you that they weren't suitable in enclosed fixtures. But who reads the packaging? This is actually still something of a problem with LED bulbs, but many of them on the market today have electronics and temperature sensors designed to limit their output and prevent overheating, which allows them to be used without worry. But even simple orientation could be a problem with CFLs. If a fixture had its socket at the top and thus the bulb was hanging, a CFL would find itself with its ballast above the tube. The tube is the part that gets hottest, and since warm air rises, well, the ballast gets pretty hot. This wasn't always a problem. There could be enough airflow depending on the fixture's design, but often enough it was. More premature failures. Another thing that would kill them quickly? Frequent short use. Now, this problem didn't necessarily need to be a problem. But because we humans are impatient, fickle things, we didn't like bulbs that behaved like this one. A delay between switch on and light is certainly annoying, but this is much easier on the electrodes at the ends of the tube. This programming allows thermionic emissions from the filaments at the ends to help strike the arc. It's the easiest way to do that, and the most gentle on the electrodes. This particular bulb spent many years in a fixture on a timer and has undoubtedly racked up many thousands of hours, yet it still functions. But to the average person, this was just annoying, so instant start ballasts became the norm. These essentially just blast a high voltage charge right through the tube. And this does make for a delay-free start, but it comes at the expense of harming the electrodes. Each start wears them down a tiny bit, and while a long operating session may help restore them, when used in places like a closet or bathroom where the light is only on for a few minutes at a time, that opportunity simply doesn't exist. The great irony here was that the instant start ballasts made them seem more practical for these short use applications, but in actuality it made them much worse. The CFL was really best suited for general living space illumination that would be left on for long periods of time. But of course, much of that came from ceiling light fixtures like these, which would harm the bulbs but in a different way. Where they could really shine were in table and floor lamps. A lot of outdoor fixtures like these carriage things would do okay also. Really, just any fixture where it wasn't upside down and had decent airflow would do alright. But what about recessed cans? Those are always hanging bulbs upside down. Well, this wasn't the only style of CFL. In their heyday, we were brute forcing CFL tech into all sorts of weird and interesting places, like these imitation flood lamps. Some were even made to look like actual par lamps. Or, my particular favorite, these teeny tiny things that IKEA sold at one point, with an intermediate base to be just that extra bit of annoying. Still, even in suitable applications where they wouldn't overheat and die, CFLs still had drawbacks. A big unsolvable issue was that when you first turned them on, they hadn't yet gotten their Fulbright scholarship. Fluorescent lamps take time to warm up, as not all the mercury is a vapor when they're cold. For general purpose lamps like these at room temperatures, this wasn't a huge deal. They'd be about half their normal brightness when cold, certainly not at their best, but not unusable by any means either. And usually within just a minute or so, they'd be as bright as they'd get. But for whatever reason, most of the specialty bulbs that came about over the years would start out with next to useless brightness. Just take a look at this little flood thing. This is at room temperature, but hasn't been started in a while. Turn it on, and that's barely anything. In fact, you can see the pink tinge brought about by the bit of neon in there used as a starter gas. Sometimes this would be purple, suggesting argon was the starter gas. Anyway, after a while it is nice and bright, but this is annoying. In my experience, nearly every non-standard CFL behaved just like this, be it flood, globe, A19 mimics, these weird little things. Really, anything that wasn't the standard exposed curlicue. I'm really curious about why cold starts seem to be much worse in these specialty bulbs, especially since these floods, for example, are really just a standard lamp with a special shade. I have no idea why these should have darker starts than these ordinary lamps, yet they do. Only thing I can think of is that having the tube enclosed led to higher operating temps thanks to a lack of airflow, which required different vapor pressure characteristics, which ultimately meant weak, slow starts. And then, regardless of type, using CFLs outdoors was interesting. In cold temperatures, they'd be very dim at startup and could take several minutes to reach full brightness. For something like a porch light that'll be on all night, well, that's not too much of a problem, but when it gets really cold, well, they start to lose brightness. They can't actually reach their operating temperature when it's that cold, and on cold enough days, they may not even be able to start at all. Not ideal. And, as you can imagine, their proneness to death by overheating meant that in hot climates, they'd be even more at risk depending on the situation. Oh, and of course there's the elephant in the room, mercury. It's not great stuff. Now, in some senses, this problem was overblown. The amount of mercury that's actually in these is minuscule, and it's not like if you broke one, you'd need to exit the room in a panic and call a hazmat team, else you'll wake up the next day with an extra toe. Accidental breakage was not a 4-alarm fire kind of event, but at scale, disposing of these in landfills is not good. They should be recycled, and unfortunately, efforts to do this, particularly in the US it seems, were pretty sloppy. Some stores kept receptacles for you to return dead bulbs. IKEA was particularly good at this, but plenty of places left you in the dark on how to deal with a bulb that left you in the dark. You can never get 100% capture with anything, and while estimates for how many ended up being recycled are all over the place, in the best case it's quite bleak. The majority of these were disposed of improperly. Yay. There are only two ways to fix that problem. Make it easier or perhaps incentivize recycling them, shame on policymakers for not getting that together, or eliminate them entirely. And luckily, that's pretty much where we're at. LED bulbs are still e-waste, to be clear, but they don't have mercury in them, and that's a huge plus. In general, the LED bulb fixed all the problems that CFLs had, except maybe for RF interference problems. One particular thing that LEDs brought us that really just never got figured out with CFLs was dimming. Sure, dimmable CFLs did exist, but in my experience, they always sucked. I don't know what was so hard about that. At my old job, we had tons of ceiling fixtures in the lobby that had fixed ballasts and replaceable lamps, like these. and they handled dimming just fine. I guess it was just too expensive to figure out how to do that in lamp-integrated ballasts. Now, dimmable LEDs are everywhere, and they come in all sorts of great styles with various features. Some of them are even smart. I think they know algebra. We've gotten good at designing LED lamps to dissipate the heat they generate well and to keep themselves in check when that's not possible. Color rendering these days is generally much better even in basic lamps and can be truly excellent in premium products. We are definitely in a better place today. But these things, they didn't suck. They were important. Miniaturizing fluorescent lights into these tiny things was a feat of its own, and I appreciate it greatly. CFLs also finally spurred development of warm white phosphor formulations that weren't terrible. I mean, this Circline tube is just horrid. That is not a warm and pleasant glow, GE. It's sickly. These were just misunderstood. I bet many of you can think back to a few of these that just kept on trucking. In fact, maybe you're like me and still have some going strong. When they were used in an appropriate application, they really weren't half bad. If anything is to blame for their reputation, I think it's that their abilities were oversold. A lot of them died too young simply because of how they were used, and it's not their users' fault. Manufacturers just want to sell you light bulbs, so they're not likely to help you figure out those details. And again, and I know I've said this like a million times, it's not like I miss these. Even in the best of cases, they would still lose output as they age, which often led to color shifting. They still take time to warm up, particularly when they're cold. Dimmability is still rare and awful when it is there, but I don't look back on these with pure hatred. In fact, I'm quite fond of what they managed to accomplish. The end. I wouldn't for a moment suggest that the CFL is a superior light. Darn it, I missed a pause. Going real great to produce UVC germicidal lamps. Lamps, not lambs. Germicidal lambs. What are those? First, an arc discharge. Don't mind me just thinking about how I'm going to put this down. Anyway, you all... I don't want to be too dismissive of myself. First, an arc discharge has to be established. After... How many times will I record this line? From this end to that end takes a bit of effort. There are many different ways to do this which aren't important right now, but I missed the word, so I have to restart. Anyway, you also need a ballast and starter. Anyway, you also need a ballast and starter circuit to drive. This is really annoying. With these long fellas, that wasn't much of an issue. But if you want to get... Stop making so much noise.